Hello, it's Ren Presents time. I'm your host, Ren, and today we continue with the Shadowtech Goddess, Part 2, Chapter 10. Shadowtech Goddess? Last week, the Seeker and our intrepid heroes made berth at Hoffman Plate, Planetfall, to thoroughly stock up for their extremely long voyage to newly rediscovered Ing. While there, they met up with Ottoman John Esquire, who prattled on about Professor Hannah Ben Sherlamp and how she's telling all her compachos in the learned society, the learned circles, that she discovered Ing, and that pissed Gwen off. Hannah Ben Sherlamp has some bad info, and she's looking in the wrong place, but that's not stopping her from making a big deal about it and the credit taking for rediscovering Ing. Then she sent the Lacerta to slaughter absolutely everybody aboard the Seeker with a tiny but powerful wethead bomb. Paymaster Stenstrom then goes on an epic rant telling her via his Tregador what he's going to do to her should she set that bomb off. Kind of humorous, I think, and never quite had an encounter with her as Gwen gave her a good pop in the brain as she wasn't expecting any potent telepaths around, pretty much blew her ears out, sent her to the ground bleeding, and Tara, using her Molly, discovered the location of the wethead bomb. So now we proceed on our quest to Ing, and it's a long way off. They'll be out of the league, no ports of call, no provision, no maintenance or dry dock. They're pretty much on their own, just the way any wind-jamming vessels would have been back in the 16th, 17th century. Heading out on the ocean is pretty much like heading out into deep space. You are on your own. You gotta bring your own craftsmen, your own tools, your own knowledge, make your own fate, and that's what they're going to be doing, basically, on their way to Ing, so they can get to the Shrine of Baraster and then turn the Anatimeter's knob. A couple quick notes. I mentioned, or the salty tugger last week mentioned, Modron, how it was a moon that got swallowed up by Planetfall's atmosphere, but it came in at such an obtuse angle that it hasn't really struck the Planetfall's core. It's just going round and round really fast, and Planetfall's so big and its cloud layer is so thick that Modron is beneath the clouds. Modron is probably the most dangerous place in the league or in Zaffin space. It's not a pleasant place. It had been colonized, but then a rogue comet knocked it out of its orbit and into Planetfall. In a few millennia, it will touch bottom, and Planetfall will go up and basically ignite into a small star. Most of the inhabitants were removed or evacuated from Modron before it entered Planetfall's atmosphere, but allegedly a few stayed, and they became known as the Fomora, or the People of the Fire, as Modron, is truly a hellish place. It's only probably a tiny sliver of the moon is inhabitable. The rest is basically heated into an inferno, and then the back half is frozen into an icy hell. Not a pleasant place. And we meet in other books some Fomora and when we see what Modron has done to them over the years. I also mention infrequently SMs, or stellar mocks, and what those are is usually the ship is just going at a winding speed, which is very fast but very slow when you're traversing the open space. Getting from one star to another can take thousands of years just at a winding speed. But with SM, or stellar mach as it's known, those thousands of years can be cut down just to a couple days or a couple weeks, depending on where you're going. The problem, stellar mach is very dangerous, and it uses SM coils, which is elder tech, that the League doesn't necessarily fully understand how these coils, they know how the coils work, but what happens if you use these coils too much, they really don't understand. It was a technology given to them by the elders, and as such, stellar Mach transverses, or SMs, are usually very short, only a couple minutes long at most, and your math has to be down to the nth degree accurate, because if it's a little bit too long, a little bit too short, you'll end up in an unknown place. You could end up at the other side of the galaxy. It just depends, and it's also very deleterious to the people on the ship. Some people can't handle it. A lot of people who wash out of the fleet wash out because they can't handle stellar Mach, and usually one tour out into space doesn't consist of more than 3 or 4 stellar Mach transverses before they're back on a planet of somewhere and the crew can rest. In this case, they're going to need at least 10 just to get there, and then 10 back. That's a lot to ask of the crew. And some people fall sick, and it's known as gift valve. The brains of these people have been modified, and some of them have the gifts of the mind that were bestowed upon them by the elders. Allows them to do a great number of things, but these gifts can turn against you in a stellar Mach transverse, and you get a sickness known as gift valve sometimes, where your brain just basically short circuits. Not a pleasant thing to happen. So we'll see how the crew holds up in this long slog to Ing. So enough of me talking and shit. Let's get to this. Part 2, Chapter 10, The Shadow Tech Goddess. 5 weeks into the journey to Ing is when it happened. The ship was holding up well, stray lights being tough birds, and the engines were responding normally. The crew allowed extra rations, entertained themselves with bowling in the hold and a little grog, were doing well, mitigating Stenstrom's initial fears. He fully admitted he hadn't given them their proper due. Gwendolyn and several crew from ship's navigations made careful maps, finding little but far-flung systems populated with gas giants and other inhospitable worlds along the way. Every day, Stenstrom went to the observatory and looked through the telescope, now auto-caged on Ing, seeing the tiny blue speck of light grow into a progressively bigger speck as time went by. Another week or two, and they should be able to make out surface details. That would be something to see. They perform stellar Mach intersections several times a week, bringing the huge SM coils to bear and blinking out of existence for up to 90 seconds, then reappearing vast distances ahead. The ravages of SM travel upon mind and body prevented longer forays. The body could be preserved in compression tanks, but the mind would be left behind. People would emerge insane, possessed, or blanked, with no consciousness left to them. Even the short intersections they entered into created problems, the mysterious sickness known as gift valve being a severe issue. Fortunately, nobody had yet come down with it. Stellar Mach was a must, though as Gwen calculated, without it, their 5 or 6 week trip to Ing would take a standard sail 10,000 years. Gwen had dropped the demure pretense of hiding and had moved into his quarters full time. He was surprised how many personal things she had, his quarters now almost unrecognizable from before. She had begun a slow but steady process of integrating him into her thoughts. The stopover, she called it. She told him as a girl, she and her sisters often went for long stretches of time in the Prentice household connected to the minds of her parents, sharing their deepest thoughts and feelings. Gwen said it wasn't unusual for them to go months without hearing each other's voices. Their minds did all the talking for them. The sensation of Gwen entering his mind was akin to a tiny fist sliding into his skull, pushing his brain aside, and then the hands slowly opening, the fingers spreading out. The loving tapestry of Gwen's mind radiated away from the hand, filling him up. He tried to speak, and always she'd gently put her fingers to his lips. "Shh," she'd say. Always he was saturated with information. The new and unfamiliar landscape of Gwen's mind moved around him like a vast art gallery of paintings and relief sculptures, just waiting to be discovered. At the perimeter of the gallery were the blaring minds and chatter of the other people on the ship, being forcibly kept out by Gwen. He'd be inside her body, and he assumed she was in his as well. So odd. The shape and extra weight of her breasts, the way her clothes hung on her smaller frame, the sizzle of estrogen in her blood, and the distinct void between her legs. No penis, and the strange plumbing of her vagina. Wow, that was... She liked to kiss him on the cheek at such times. He'd feel her lips on his cheek and endure the effect of the kiss moving throughout her body, registering it as a slight itch in her womb. Sometimes they'd retire to bed, minds hooked together. He'd have his own dreams and share hers as well, the two mixing into a thick mental paste. He always assumed her dreams might be a bit more pugilistic, perhaps of fighting tournaments and boxing. But no, her dreams were modest and down to the ground. She dreamed of him quite often, sitting in the parlor of their manor, playing the dulcimer, or sitting down to an evening of cards. She dreamed of someday carrying their child. Being a mother was very important to her. His dreams, on the other hand, were frenzied, either by design or by the unfamiliar mental openness with Gwen he was placed in. His dreams bordered on the psychedelic. He dreamed often of the Hall of Mirrors, a place that was all around him and full of danger, soaked in darkness. And once or twice he dreamt of Morgan. He dreamt once that he woke up in bed and she was in bed with him, fully dressed, just staring at him. Another time, he dreamt that Morgan was there performing an autopsy on Gwen while in bed. That was the most horrific dream he'd ever had. Other times, he dreamt of someone laughing in the darkness. "So, we're well on schedule," Gwen said, giving Stenstrom a debriefing in the conference room. She had, up on the holocone, the Black Abyss's stellar chart. A blinking dot marked their progress. It was well past halfway. Tara sat at the end of the table with her feet up as usual, her red marine coat thrown open. "What is the status of our engines?" Stenstrom asked. "The engines are fine, as I said," Gwen answered. "I have a whole databank of telemetry if you want to see it," she happily sent to him. "No, thank you." "And provisioning?" Tara answered. Fine. The ship's pantries are still brimming with provision. How many stellar Mach intersections have we accomplished so far?" 12. Stenstrom raised his eyebrows. 12? That's quite a lot. Have we had any crew go down with sickness? Tara answered. "A few. One was injured in the run-up to Mach Steady, and we've a few small cases of gift valve. Nothing to worry about." "How many is a few, actually?" 8. "All right, 8. And are these 8 cases being properly dealt with?" "They are. Not having Morgan here is a hindrance, but our Chancellor Hospitallers are doing fine." Stenstrom rubbed his chin. "Honestly, Belle, 8 cases of gift valve is not a hefty butcher's bill," Gwen said. "I've seen more than that come down with it after only 1 SM. You never know how people are going to react. Those who are profiled as susceptible to gift valve are usually screened out of ship duty." "How many more stellar Mach transverses will we need before we arrive at Eng?" Gwen answered. 3, maybe 4. Our next one is due in 15 hours. "I've never had gift valve before," Stenstrom said. "What are the symptoms?" Tara answered. "It varies. In mild cases, you get a bit of nausea and paranoia, accompanied by bouts of confusion and hallucination. In severe cases, a person stricken with it can become catatonic with minimal brain function. Have to be kept alive in an aspersion tank." Stenstrom felt a twinge in his stomach. "Do we have any cases like that now?" "No," Tara said. "Well, thank creation for that. What is the treatment for this condition?" "Rest and removal from ship duty is the best treatment." Pharmaceuticals can also help. Do we have any habitable planets nearby where we can make birth if need be? Gwen drew Stenstrom's attention to a system not far ahead of the ship's present course. Well, that's the oddest thing. To date, our magnifying chart has been startlingly accurate, except for this planetary system here. It's a standard Type 2 planetary system featuring one green world in the 4th position. So what about it? It's not there. We have detected no sign of it, not via scanning or visual sighting. His stomach was full-on aching. Perhaps it was destroyed, its star gone to Nova. Bell, oh please. A Nova system is quite a mess. We'd easily see the remnants of the system, if that were the case. It's simply not there. There's actually sort of a hole there where it should be, Tara said. He stood and went to the window. He wanted to return to his quarters and rest. He was amazed Gwen hadn't detected it. She was in tune with all his inner workings. Perhaps the Black Abyss made a mistake. She hasn't made any yet. She even gave the planet a name. Punt. The word stuck in Stenstrom's head. Punt. The moment he heard the word, the room began to spin around him. He'd never been sick a moment in his life. Now the room spun around him in a hopeless wobble. Punt? As in the nihilists of Punt? The sect hoping to destroy the universe? Probably a coincidence, Gwen stated. What? Tara cried. Come on, how can it be? I'll tell you what it is. Punt's a planar world. There one moment, gone the next. Planar world. A voice echoed out of nowhere. It's not possible. Planar worlds are a physical improbability. Oh yeah? Then where is it? And one more thing that Gwen forgot to mention. We're detecting trace amounts of shadow tech precisely in the area where the Punt system should be. Odd memories forced their way into his head. Punt. He'd been there. He remembered it. The sky there was a whitish negative image. Tara was with him. A different Tara, tall, goddess-like, shadow tech billowing into the sky. Which way was up? Which way was down? He didn't know. The table they were sitting at seemed to be riding a violent storm. Gwen and Tara swirled about. A third person was sitting at the table staring at him from the other side. An unfamiliar face smiled at him. Hello, Lord Belmont, came a sultry voice. Colors clashed in front of him. Belle, what do you think? Somebody asked. Yes, Lord Belmont. What do you think? Came an unknown voice. He fell to the floor. Belle, he's down! He's down! Summon the Hospitallers! A storm of chaos subsided. Dull obscurity sharpened into ebon clarity. Stenstrom sat in a vast room. Smooth marble, lofty columns, and fine accessories, it reminded him of a great Vith hall, with the lighting turned down. The Gothic decor appeared to be all black, but it might have been dark blue or possibly brown. It was difficult to tell. He was seated at the end of a long table. How long did it go? 100 feet? 200? Possibly longer? A legion of high-backed black chairs were tucked neatly in at either side of the table. Each chair, and there were too many to count, was occupied by a silent figure, all sitting straight with practiced posture. He could see their elegant silhouettes. All the people at the table appeared to be female. It reminded him of his mother's table back in Tyrol, a table full of his 29 sisters. His sisters, except for a few, also sat with perfect posture, chin up, shoulders back, slender and stately in their chairs. The figures were all locked still in their seats like wax statues rendered into sitting positions. He got out of his chair with a loud drag across the floor and approached a nearby figure. "My lady?" he asked. The woman, her gaze fixed on the table's surface, did not move. He stooped down to look at the side of her face. It was a somber, black-haired woman. "Recognize her?" a soft voice asked, filling up the room. It startled him. "Who's there?" he asked, reaching for his ints, which were not present. A figure sitting at the distant end of the table moved slightly and responded. "Me. I'm here." He squinted. The figure was too far away to make out clearly. "Show yourself." "As you wish." The figure stood and walked around the table. It approached with slow, measured patience, its footfalls noisy and hollow. Like all the others in the hall, it was female. She wore an odd, tight-fitting costume, like the astro traders in their body-fitting elastic suits he often saw scrubbing down the hulls of the shipping at port. In the dim lighting, her costume seemed to be made out of black liquid. It flowed seamlessly into her shoes, which sported impressively long heels, making a din of noise with each step. Puck, puck, puck. The sound of each step bounced across the room. "Do you recognize her?" the figure asked again. She wore a light cape which took flight in fluttering rolls as she walked. "Where am I?" he asked as he watched her approach. Where have you been for the last month or so?" He thought a moment. "The Hall of Mirrors?" "Yes! Well done." The woman arrived at his side at last. In addition to her odd costume, she wore a bizarre helmet that was perfectly round like a ball. The only part of the woman's face he could see was her pale chin, her mouth, and her nose. The rest was covered up by her helmet. A sharp visor drew a glowing purple line across the helmet where her eyes should be. "You're sick right now. Gift valve, I think they call it." "I don't have gift valve." "Yes, you do." He looked around the hall. "If this is the Hall of Mirrors, then where is the anatometer?" "Over there." She pointed down the hall. Stenstrom looked but didn't see anything. "Don't bother," she said. "It's not yours." She gestured to the lady seated at the table. "Not to change the subject, but I'll ask again. Do you know this woman? I'm quite curious." "I can't really see her face, just her profile." "Oh? Look again." Stenstrom turned his attention back to the woman. She now looked directly at him over her left shoulder. She was pretty and proud. Her expression was small-mouthed and somewhat sad. "I don't know this woman," he said. "Are you certain?" "Yes, I'm certain." "I didn't think you might. You couldn't know all of them, could you? You aren't the all-in-one, are you?" She stood there, her liquid-like costume flowing around her. "What? Who are you?" he asked. "Me? I'm the person who has been worshipped for ages. There are many who follow me. There are many who seek me out." She bowed with a flourish. "I am often called the Shadow Tech Goddess." He was taken aback. "You are the Shadow Tech Goddess?" "That is correct." Stenstrom looked her over. She radiated an innocuous, otherworldly power. She was alluring and charming, certainly not what he had expected. He had expected something more grand, something incalculable, inconceivable, incomprehensible, and irresistible. Standing before him was a shapely and oddly dressed woman, but nothing more. She seemed to be something that could be faced, could be dealt with if need be. Not a force of nature radiating fear, not a singular individual, an elusive beast, always just out of reach. He touched her hand. She did not react or pull it back. She allowed him to examine it. Her hand was small and delicate, and perfectly tangible. Her costume felt like warm latex. She took his hand and laced her fingers with his. "I am flesh and blood, sir, I assure you." "And you are the destroyer of all things?" he asked. "I destroy things from time to time, yes." "Why must you be so glum?" "I was expecting something different." "Like what?" "Something more impressive, I suppose." She made a slight surprised expression with her mouth. He quickly responded, "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to offend you. You are certainly attractive and stately, and that's not how I envisioned the Shadow Tech Goddess. Why am I not quaking in fear right now?" She threw her head back and laughed. "Would you like to be? What is it about men and being afraid? Men love to be afraid, I've observed. Perhaps it's that little rush of excitement you receive afterwards, like you've just withstood something or accomplished something important. Fear has an addictive quality to it." "I don't enjoy being afraid." "Ah, well then. I apologize for not being what you expected. He called her attention to the seated figures. Who are all these people? Still holding his hand, she led him down the length of the long table, passing one silent female after another. These are your loves, Lord Belmont, across the various realms, realities, and pocket planes of the universe. There are so many of them, aren't there? These are my loves. Indeed, as you touched on earlier, you are in the Hall of Mirrors. And what comes out of the Hall of Mirrors? I'm certain you've been told. Your loves. And here they are. They passed woman after woman, and he didn't recognize a single one. The woman who called herself the Shadowtech Goddess lifted her hand. At this table sit the Covis, the also-rans, the one-timers, the ones who are more infrequent in your life. If you took an accounting of each one, you would, no doubt, begin to see a few here and there, you know. How could I not know them? She shrugged. There are many of you. Their exploits took them on vastly different paths. Here are the results. A lot of ladies at a very long table. Might be a man or two mixed in here somewhere. He ran his gaze up and down the table. So many. An army of souls sitting there motionless. I'm told you killed one of these ladies sitting here. Horribly, I might add. And that you stole my antimatter at Clovis. She placed a demure finger to her chin and tapped it. Did I? I have no memory of that. I don't steal things. They reached the end of the table at last. There was an open doorway leading to a colorful outside area, a harsh contrast from the dim, dark hall. Are you saying it didn't happen? No, I'm saying I didn't do it. She looked around, touching her helmet with her left hand. You did lose the antimatter, that's certain enough, and you've been stuck here in the hall ever since, barely managing to avoid my wrath. She smiled. So far you haven't annoyed me. Unfortunately, there's more to worry about in the hall besides simply me. There are quite a number of horrors residing here, all focused in on you at the moment. Would you care to see? What are they? He asked. Come with me outside. I'll show you. She held her gloved hand out for him to take, then led him outside into the glare, leaving an infinitely long table and the ladies sitting there behind. And with that, we conclude Part 2, Chapter 10, the Shadowtech Goddess. They passed the area where Punt should have been, and it wasn't there. And Tara brought up the topic of a planar world. And planar worlds in my League of Elder universe are planets that can disappear from where they normally are and reappear someplace else. I had a nightmare once that I woke up and the planet Mars was in the room with me. It had disappeared from its orbit and was there in my room with me. And it was really big and kind of scary to look at. But there are these planets that are supposed to be able to disappear and reappear someplace else. Conwell is one of them. Wonderland, which is a Zaffin world, is also said to be a planar world where it will disappear and then show up someplace else and then reappear where it was. It happens. And apparently, Punt is also a planar world. They also mention, apparently, Paymaster Stenstrom falls victim to Gift Valve and finds his mind transported into the Hall of Mirrors, where he seats a long table full of women and another woman who calls herself the Shadowtech Goddess. She's not quite what he's expecting. He isn't quite sure what he was expecting. He'd heard a lot about the Shadowtech Goddess. Figured she'd be more like a force than an actual person. But here's this apparently attractive lady in a tight-fitting suit and a helmet talking to him civilly. He's not feeling a hint of fear like he did previously at Clovis or in Sarfortnum College. And she tells him the table that he's seeing with all these women are full of Covis. And if you read or listened to the Cat book, you remember that Cat was a Covis. A Covis is an extraplanar entity, and it's sort of like a wild card. It's like a one-off. In the universe, there are certain people that Paymaster Stenstrom is supposed to be with or meant to be with, and they appear at his side more often than other people. If you remember the little disc with all the ladies' names on it, how Gwen's name was on there 4 times, that's significant. And in the next chapter, we'll learn more about that. But the other ones, the ones that appear just once, are Covis. They're not predestined to be with this person, but they can be, depending on if it's a good Covis or a bad one, they can fit in with this person, Paymaster Stenstrom, quite well. Or they can lead him to his ruin. It just depends. Covis are very unpredictable. Not that these people are bad people, but just things don't work out the way the cosmic stratagem would like it to. And then she mentions something about a garden of horrors where more things await him, and that's where she's leading him now. Pretty weird chapter, I must say. Reading it again, I haven't read it in a while. It's a little weird, but so apparently Paymaster Stenstrom's body is flat on its back, but his mind is taking a nice stroll with the Shadow Tech Goddess, or someone claiming to be the Shadow Tech Goddess. If you've read the cat book, you know exactly the answer to that question. I'm not going to go over it now. For more, see cat. Anywho, next week we continue Part 2, Chapter 11, The Garden of Horrors, and that is the final chapter in Part 2, and after that we proceed immediately to Part 3. Almost done with the book. I think we have less than 100 pages, and we are finished. But first, we got to get through Part 3, and that's going to be a big ordeal, I promise you. So, next week, once again, Part 2, Chapter 11, The Garden of Horrors. One of my favorite chapters in this book. I just like it. I like how it turned out. Anywho, until then, this is Ren Presents. I'm your host, Ren. Peace out.